A hunter's first true kill is rarely a giant and powerful wyvern, but more often than not, one of a family of terrestrial bird wyverns that strongly resemble dromaeosaurs. Such species are very common in the Old World, and are almost certainly the most frequent predators in most ecosystems. Perhaps the most notable thing about them is the huge sexual dimorphism between the dominant male and the rest of the pack. What benefits does this give though? Can there be a role for more normal males? And what are some of the individual adaptations the assorted cast of dromes and greats have? So to begin, the main chunk of this video will be discussing the various phenomena in nature that can apply to all the species in this video, and the overall concept of the alpha male. Then some discussion of the various specific morphology and unique behaviours in each of the species. To kick things off, let's open with the keystone individual concept. Social animals have intricate behaviours and clear displays of emotion, and among other things, scientific study of these species has found that some animals are more equal than others. The concept finds that in social groups of animals, certain individuals have far greater importance to the workings of the group than other adults, even to the point of their role being irreplaceable. They're an individual that does things that the others can't. So in this respect, I propose that the dromes and the greats, as well as the minion leader monsters in general, are keystone individuals in their social units. But what are the factors they provide that the smaller individuals of the pack would be unable to do by themselves? For a start, I believe hunting may be one of them. This is represented in some social carnivores from our world. In one study of grey wolves, it was found that the most important factor in hunting success was the age and experience of the adult male. Older males were unsurprisingly much better hunters of moose than younger ones, and were quite capable of killing adult moose single-handedly, to provision the rest of the pack consisting of their mate and offspring. The effects of the adult male can be so significant that without her mate after his death, the female in one pack prey switched to taking roe deer. Other studies also report that the breeding adults are the most important members in any pack hunt, and the dominant male is often the one taking the most dangerous role in subduing the prey too. Male wolves achieve this successful provisioning by quite literally being built different. As well as being between 20 and 30% larger than females, they also have thicker, more robust bones, especially in the skull and the limbs. This facilitates both the killing of large prey as well as the fighting of other males. This does come with a trade-off of increasing movement costs though. Whilst the physical disparities between male and female wolves are not quite as exaggerated as with the dromes and the greats, the principle is likely the same. One of their key roles in the pack is to provision it with large prey only they can bring down due to their vastly greater size and more powerful morphology. In the intros to many of these species, we see the drome or the great take a central role in the acquisition of food, either using its much greater mass and strength or a form of chemical attack, or both, combined to neutralise the prey. Whilst the smaller individuals are capable of producing similar chemicals, the amount and potency are greatly reduced, and thus it will be far less effective. Their relatively small size and gracile builds also means that even with numbers they don't have an especially good chance of taking down large adult herbivores. In the intro to the original game we can see a mother aptonoth is more than a match for a small group of velociprey, and even a young popo is only harassed by a pair of baggies until the great baggie arrives to take it down. It may even be without the presence of a drome or a great, the smaller individuals may prey switch to considerably smaller animals. Both jaggy and baggy seem content with fish, and whilst velociprey set their heights somewhat higher, they still avoid adult aptonoth in favour of youngsters or animals like kelbie. It's only with the strength and leadership of a drome or a great can a large meal like an adult aptonoth or other herbivores like slagtoth, apsaros, or popo be successfully pulled down. In terms of the actual killing, dromes and greats seem to use a mix of old and new tactics to take down their prey. In the drome's pin attack, they stand on the hunter whilst taking bites and allowing the rest of the pack to maul the hunter. This is somewhat reminiscent of the theory of raptor prey restraint, the latest and best supported theory for how some dromaeosaurs may have killed their prey, by anchoring themselves onto it with their sickle claws and then eating it alive. The dromaeosaurs in question also use their wings to stabilise themselves while doing so, but it may be that either Monster Hunter's raptors are built to be more steady or this has a secondary role. As well as flat out killing large prey single-handedly, the experienced adults of wild canid species will also take on the most dangerous role in the hunt, of grabbing the animal by the front so the rest of the pack can bring it down as well. As well as grey wolves, this is often seen in African painted wolves when hunting larger or dangerous prey. We see in various cinematics that the adult male isn't just influential in taking down large prey, it often takes on the central and most dangerous role. The great jaggy rushes to the head of the herd of aptonoth to take down an adult single-handedly. But once you've acquired your kill, you still have to keep it. Whether it was taken down yourself or died a non-violent death, a fresh or old carcass is a hotly contested resource among carnivores in any world. There are few better known predator rivalries in our own world than that of the lion and the spotted hyena, portrayed in Disney and documentary film alike. Hyenas are daring and aggressive competitors, and whilst considerably smaller than lionesses, they make up for this with numbers. Whilst the frequency and intensity of competition can vary depending on the ecosystem these two adaptable predators live in, their shape of it is often the same. The two species compete fiercely, stealing kills and killing juveniles and vulnerable adults of each other. As the smaller species, hyenas will mob lions at any opportunity, and even attack lionesses without a kill, and when outnumbering lionesses on a kill, they can also steal it from them. This frequent aggression works, as research shows whilst lionesses will readily approach the sounds of much smaller predators like painted wolves, they're unwilling to approach and contest hyenas if they hear them nearby. The scenario changes when adult male lions enter the equation, however. Fully maned, considerably larger and far more aggressive than lionesses, male lions are often a chief cause of natural mortality in spotted hyenas, and will often rob their kills. On top of this, when male lions are present at either a kill of their own making or their lionesses, spotted hyenas are much less likely to try and steal it, and even less likely to succeed, and charges by male lions can often dissuade hyenas from sticking around too. Whilst high-resolution research, with large sample sizes, has found that the older notion of male lion kills being completely invulnerable to hyenas isn't quite true, the point still stands that the presence of male lions has a significant and irreplaceable impact in the competitive nature of the two species. Lionesses are also far more willing to approach and accost hyenas with the company of a male lion, and it swings any dispute over a kill in favour of the lion's odds much more. There is no doubt in the subordinate individuals of dromes and greats that there is a lot of competition, as well as with other small carnivores as well. We get some real evidence of this in the intro to Great Roggy, which effectively sums up this aspect of my hypothesis that the presence of the alpha male swings the conflict between the Roggies and the Jaguars entirely into a Roggy victory, that they couldn't have pulled off without the alpha male. There is considerable overlap in the ranges of a lot of the smaller monsters. Velociprey, Genprey and Ioprey all overlap in the wetlands and certain areas of forest in the Old World, and Velociprey and Ioprey also overlap in the tropical rainforests too. Great Baggy and Gaiadrome overlap in the mountains, and Velociprey and Jaggies also do in some areas of open plain as well as Jaggies and Genprey in more arid areas. Whilst, as we'll explore later, at least some of these animals have factors to help reduce competition, these groups of predators will likely exploit similar resources, and may have very fierce competition when they encounter each other. These conflicts may be all to play for or a numbers game whenever it's just the subordinate individuals, but when a dominant shows up, it likely swings the entire interaction in their favour, be it for food, territory or a nesting site. With their large size, greater weaponry and array of toxins, a fight between two dromes or greats likely results in one backing down before things get fatal. But like male lions and hyenas, it's quite possible that for the subordinate individuals their chief cause of mortality comes from dromes and greats of other species, when caught without the rest of their pack. Subordinates no doubt suffer occasional kleptoparasitism or predation from large wyverns, but for the most part their small size and strong niche partitioning relative to the top predators may reduce competition to allow them to stay out of the way. In regards to Monster Hunter, I've often seen it met with skepticism that smaller predators could even exist in a world of carnivorous giants, along with the notion that Monster Hunter has far too many apex predators for an ecosystem to handle. But this is complete bunk. For one, these animals likely live at very low densities. A recent study estimated that there were only ever 2.5 million T-Rex ever in history, and only 20,000 on the Earth at any one time. And T-Rex were unique in that they stacked the deck with themselves by making their different life stages fulfill different niches, meaning they were likely the only carnivore at the time over a certain size. Considering the top order predators of Monster Hunter live in much more diverse guilds, they likely live at even lower densities than T-Rex. On top of this, the Earth has seen numerous heavily saturated predator guilds before. Before humanity stuck its big nose in and ruined everything, Africa would have had 5 large predators along with 1 large scavenger and 1 large aquatic predator, and yet small mesopredators still exist. The Indo-Gangetic Plain would have had 6 large predators, 1 large scavenger, 1 aquatic predator, and 2 species of occasionally carnivorous omnivore as well. Pleistocene North America would have had 9 large predators, potentially 12 depending on the status and distribution of Smilodon and Myricinonyx genus. If you want to use dinosaurs, then the Morrison Formation had Allosaurus, Saurophaganax, Torvosaurus and Ceratosaurus. When we consider that the giant crabs are likely detritivores, Baroth an insectivore, Puki a frugivore, Palumu eats coral, Monoblos, Diablos and Durambus are herbivores, Gravios apparently eats mainly minerals, Basiljuice is likely a scavenger, that Rathian and Rathalos are the same species, and then that Elders, Joe and Basiljuice are likely transient species, and possibly Tigrex and Eboniodogron are too, then it becomes clear that there's a lot of different niches for these animals to occupy, and they likely all won't be operating in the same area at the same time. And this isn't even discussing the potential niche partitioning that the specific predators may have as well. So when we factor all this in, it's quite believable that small mesopredators can still exist. All that said, this doesn't mean that the raptors never get eaten, far from it. Whilst the subordinates likely manage to avoid conflict with larger predators, the larger prey taken by the dominants will likely put them in direct competition with them in a lot of areas. And interactions between the dromes and the greats and larger wyverns can be described as perhaps one-sided, shall we say? There is no doubt that the alpha males bear the brunt of the ire of larger predators, but the species as a whole may have a way around it, or at very least some species may. Juvenile male great jaggies are called just jaggies, and from their frequency of encounter they seem very common. Jaggi may have a very skewed sex ratio with a huge bias for males, specifically to protect against the high mortality rate they suffer. Great jaggi are likely the largest of the raptors. I know official figures say they aren't, but I'm ignoring that because they're literally the size of an aptonoth. They often live in open prey-rich areas where they often take large prey. They're diurnal and have conspicuous behaviours and calls. In short, they're a magnet for hungry and territorial wyverns. It's unknown if other dog or bird wyverns have similar sex ratios, but through either nocturnal habits or living in more closed or predator-light habitats, they may be able to avoid this frequent predation. The joke of great jaggi always getting beaten up may well ring true. This may also be why the guild love great jaggi and other raptors to hunt. They have a naturally quite high population turnover, so they can effectively be harvested or used for training exercises without serious population dents. A great jaggi may only last for a breeding season or two in its newfound pack before meeting a violent end. But with such sex ratios, wouldn't we be seeing more great jaggis, even with their high mortality rates? And more of other dromes and greats too? Well, it could be possible that not all males become dromes or greats. Green iguanas are quite sexually dimorphic lizards, with males being about a third larger than females and having a splendid array of spines, scales and a dewlap to make them look more attractive, especially when flushed with breeding colours. Whilst there is variation in large male strategies, the usual is that the males proudly pose and display from the bare branches of conspicuous trees, and then court females, who will select a male to continue courting with until a series of multiple consensual copulations over a few days. By overall animal standards, it's borderline progressive. Or at least it would be if not for the small males. The same size as females and almost identical to them with no adornments like a dewlap, they have no territory of their own. Rather, they find a tree with a large dominant male in it and hide in the leaves, waiting for him to leave for a female. Once the coast is clear, the smaller male attempts a forced copulation with the nearest female. She obviously doesn't take this well and tries to fight them off, and usually the dominant male returns to chase off the small male. Small males are common, but aren't very successful, but it's an example of how our typical notion of adult males of one species aren't the only form the males can have. With the skewed sex ratio seemingly producing more males than there are dominants, even with a high mortality rate, it could well be that a lot of velociprey or roggies or other subordinates could have some males among them that are almost identical to females and try to force copulations when the drome or the great isn't looking in the breeding season. These males may not be the Herculean ideals for the species, but they could also serve as buffers for extreme situations. In the event of a pack losing its dominant in the breeding season, these males could also step in so the local population doesn't risk a failed breeding year. On top of this, not all environments may favour dromes. Scientists have gone back and forth over the origin and purpose of manes in male lions, with some suggesting that they reflect the social structure of lions, which is in turn affected by the environment they live in. This particular notion has been somewhat disputed, but it's an interesting theory, and similarly, the summary paper on keystone individuals also suggests that not all environmental conditions may favour the evolution or residence of keystone individuals. With their role as chief hunters of large prey, and winners of disputes with other raptors, dromes and greats may be selected against in areas with a low density of large prey. Here their brute strength is worth little, and if anything will just be costly to maintain. We can almost formulate our own version of this lion figure. Low prey densities at all sizes will likely result in dominance being selected, due to the need to take advantage of every possible meal and the huge value of a big prey item, also making it worth defending or usurping. Low densities of large prey but plentiful small prey likely result in smaller female-like males being the most common, but high densities of all prey result in large dominance being selected for again. Great Jaggi are said to leave their natal pack, which is the one they were born into, at a certain age. This is called dispersal, and is often seen in male social animals so they can take their genes to a new area and social group, and prevent inbreeding. Presumably all the dromes and greats do this, and along the way it's possible this is where they form coalitions too. Some quests often have the hunter take down not one dominant raptor, but 2 or even 3. In male cheetahs, forming groups can improve foraging efficiency. Whilst the success rate doesn't improve, the size of the prey increases, so they get more bang for their buck energetically. For young dispersing males this is important, so they can get as much protein as possible to gain larger sizes for territorial disputes with other males. As it's also believed in cheetahs and is clear in male lions, that larger coalitions have more success in attaining and holding territory, and the benefits within of acquiring more females to raise surviving offspring. From the fact that we occasionally see and fight dominant individuals alone, it may also be that the social system is more like lions than first thought, as despite Disney, male lions don't spend all their time with the pride, and large coalitions will often spread themselves over multiple groups of lionesses. It's not just one male lion to a pride, and the males also have to mark and patrol their territory. The larger the coalition, the greater the area and the more lionesses you get. It's unknown why exactly coalitions aren't more common in dromes and greats, but a theory could be that it increases competition with larger wyverns. Male cheetah coalitions have the greatest potential for overlap with lions, due to them selecting larger prey. Whilst raptor packs may mob larger wyverns and may even predate young individuals or vulnerable adults, for the most part the one-sided relationship of their competition likely ends in occasional predation of most of the raptors, and the frequency of this may be increased with the influence of a group. The greater territory and female acquisition that comes with the strength of a coalition may make this a risk the leaders of the pack are willing to take. For interesting specific aspects of morphology to discuss regarding each of the individual species, one shared by Great Jaggi and Velocidrome is the hypertrophied talon on each hand. Some dinosaurs, like alveosaurs, had something similar, a knife-like thumb spike of which the use is unknown. It's suggested that it was for digging, and may have fulfilled a role like the claws of an anteater if they ate insects, or to dig out rodents like a badger if they ate small prey like some recent studies have suggested. Neither Velocidrome nor Great Jaggi's talon looks well suited to digging, but it could be used to hook and tear through vegetation when pursuing cornered small prey. Whilst their mass allows them to take down larger, more dangerous prey, this doesn't necessarily mean that they have to do this all the time, especially if they're alone in their dispersal period prior to joining a new pack. So it may be a useful tool to forage through thick or thorny vegetation. Another role could be combat. Especially in Great Jaggi the talon is hooked. It could be that adult male dominants fight like monitor lizards, rearing up and grappling with one another, and the stronger male flinging the smaller and weaker male to the ground. The kangaroo-like tail of the great macau is almost certainly for intraspecific combat too, with competing males leaning back and then kicking at each other with the powerful limbs and sharp claws. Their obvious goal is to inflict injury and knock them off balance, but may potentially even kill a rival if they don't submit. Velocidrome, Gendrome and Great Roggi quite notably have very large eyes that reflect light at night as well. These animals not only have vision probably as good as any flying wyvern, but the dromes especially may have some of the best night vision of any species in the game. Ideally, we'd need to dissect one to look at their scleral ring to fully conclude this, but if we speculate from their large eyes and the fact they operate just as well at night, it can be assumed that they're at least partially nocturnal, and with such massive eyes, they can likely see small, fast-moving prey with great resolution even on the darkest of nights. For great roggy and velocidrome, this also likely allows them excellent vision in permanently low-light conditions, like murky swamps or deep rainforests with thick canopy cover. Nocturnal behaviour may also have additional bonuses. One is allowing them to stay out of the way of the large predatory wyverns, which for the most part are likely diurnal. For gendrome and velocidrome as well, it also allows them to avoid great jaggy, who dwarfs both of them and would likely dominate in a physical conflict. The second may be that most of their prey has poor night vision. In lions, their hunting success is influenced by the moon phase, with darker moonless nights giving better hunting success. The nocturnal raptors may utilise the cover of darkness to get close to their wary or armoured prey for successful attacks, to isolate vulnerable youngsters or raid nests. For gendrome and great roggy especially, this could allow for the all-important strike to deliver a good enough dose of venom so that the prey can be dispatched with much greater ease. Gendrome and great roggy already lack the hypertrophied claws on the hand that velocidrome and great jaggy have, but iodrome and great baggy as well as roggy take this even further, and have no enlarged claw or talon of any form. This strongly suggests much of the physical aspect of taking down their prey has taken a back seat to relying on their chemical attacks, and indeed from footage in game it seems potent enough to down and subjugate even large herbivores. Venom isn't free, it is effectively reactive liquid protein and so are expensive to create, so it makes sense that their bodies become less adapted for physical subjugation and carrying around heavy weaponry, over movement efficiency when they can rely on their venom for most targets, though small prey may be occasionally still taken down with tooth and claw. None of them have too much of a reduced jaw though, as presumably due to taking down large prey, there is still the need for reasonably strong jaws and large gapes for maximum feeding efficiency as well. In great roggy at least, dominant struggles may be fought with tails and hip checks, as this species seems armoured over its hindquarters but not for the front part of its body. As this likely isn't going to make much difference when attacked by large wyverns, it can be assumed that it's for sexual selection among the adult males. This area could be similar to a thing called a shield in male wild boar. This is a slab of thickened tissue on the flank and shoulder of sexually mature males that increases with age, size, weight and body condition. It's believed that it protects against tusk wounds as the males fight for territory and females. And in great roggy, their armoured hindquarters could be an adaptation for fighting, which is focused on slamming into each other, hip checks and tail swipes due to their atrophied claws being of little use for fighting. The stingray-like barb may be an important weapon in these struggles to strike at the opponent torso. Finally, the great macau represents an interesting puzzle for the scholars of the monster hunter world. Much like some aspects of the study of paleontology in our own world, it is rooted in feathers. The evolutionary relationship between true bird wyverns like Yankutku and raptorial ones like velocidrome has never been that clear, as well as the origins and potential future paths of bird wyverns. It's unknown if a certain branch of wyvern ancestors almost became true birds before growing back into a more wyvern-like shape, and then a group of these diverged into the raptorial wyverns, or if the almost full-body coating of feathers is an adaptation specific to the great macau. This is only muddied further by the partial feathering on both types of wyvern with species like Hypnocatrice and the great baggy. Whilst the colourful plumage of the adult male macaws is likely for sexual selection, it's not an explanation for the smaller females, and nor is thermal regulation as they live primarily in tropical rainforest. Their reason to evolve feathers doesn't seem overt, but then the lack of feathering in other raptorial bird wyverns makes it unclear if this is an ancestral trait or not. Is Great Macau a missing link or a unique divergent? The question of whether he's the Archaeopteryx or the Kiwi of bird wyverns may not be answered for some time. So to sum up my thoughts on the raptors as a whole, the first thing I'd say is that we don't need any more. I'd much rather see the existing ones be redone and improved on as fights over a new one being created, especially for the dromes, as yeah, they all feel pretty dime a dozen. They were never really good fights, and whilst improved in 4th gen, it was still a case of fought one, fought them all. I'd ideally like to see more moves and more different moves between them, and for them to be significantly beefed up. To fly off on another tangent, a real problem I feel Monster Hunter is sliding into is that the hunting career no longer feels like a journey of progression, and instead just feels like a 100-meter sprint to the end game. I believe the solution is both more low-rank monsters, more varied ones, and stronger ones too. The raptors aren't meant to be walls, but they're not meant to be insta-kills either when you first fight them. They're your training exercise, an introduction for new hunters and a warm-up for old ones. Most people could probably take them down on their first hunt or after a few mishaps, but now they just feel like flat-out cannon fodder. The gameplay and combat has become stuffed with gimmicks that allow for huge damage without scaling the monsters appropriately to it. I really don't agree with Gaijin Hunter when he says Monster Hunter isn't getting easier, you're just getting better. But it's absolutely getting easier, with mounts and riding and turf wars and environmental traps, not to mention huge damage increases and more generous carve rates. This makes high rank and apexes easier, but the lower monster fights become an absolute slaughterhouse. Back in 1st and 2nd gen, Kutku was a wall for many people, believe it or not, as was Baroth in Tri. Both of these monsters are now considered fodder, a scarce step above the raptors. In World, it was only really Anjanath who was almost the penultimate monster before the apexes who could be considered a wall, and in Rise it's Magnum Arlo, who is literally the story boss. The first generally agreed upon wall of the game is getting higher and higher in power and later in game. The answer to this is to either reduce the gimmicks, or more likely significantly beef up the early game monsters, and have earlier walls. Right now Monster Hunter doesn't feel like a difficulty curve. It feels like a difficulty plateau with a single difficulty mountain. But having stronger starter monsters and earlier monsters, it organically increases the playtime of the game overall, and spreads the amount of time spent in each part of the story. It makes everything more of a challenge and encourages more weapon and armor sets earlier on, which means more playtime in earlier stages. It'll bring back the feeling of a journey and of progression, meaning there doesn't have to be so much focus on the endgame and less demand for more artificially powerful nonsensical subspecies, or black dragons with one-hit wipeout attacks. But this is all just my thoughts and what do I know. But back to the raptors specifically. In regards to their themes, they're a bit meh. The Greats theme never really goes anywhere, and the drone theme is a bit better with a snake charmer aspect, but really they just both fall a bit flat. The 3rd gen Fanged Beast theme is fantastic though, so I feel it's not a case of Capcom not writing good music for lower ranking monsters. Onto their design, I think most of them are pretty good. In terms of the dromes, I especially love Gendrome. The desert patterning and the viper fangs and the eye crests are all just a lovely design for a desert mesopredator. Velocidrome 2 I do have a soft spot for, having started with the first game in the franchise as my introduction to Monster Hunter. Iodrome though I feel can probably be replaced with Great Roggy though. And what else is there to say about Gaiadrome other than he is a monster that exists? Of the Greats, a bit like last time, I feel they're better, but the rose-tinted glasses of those who started in 3rd gen can make them take it and run with it a bit. A lot of the time it can wind up feeling like the same hip check, tail swipe and breath ailment. It's still better than the dromes, but it's not as amazing as some people say. I was also never initially that wild about Great Jaggy. Coming in from the earlier gens with sleek and predatory drones, I thought his colour scheme made him look a bit garish, and his frill made him look more goofy than cool, and he also looked kind of chubby. He was a monster I always struggled to take seriously, and him dying constantly really didn't help that. But I did warm to him over time and recognise him as a lot of people's favourite, and he without doubt has one of the best calls in the entire franchise. Great Baggy is decent, he has a nice design and he's 1,000 times better than Gaiadrome. The one thing I might say is that I really wish he'd been given more feathers, to suit his environment, although if nothing else it's nice that he has some at least. Great Roggy is my favourite of the three, and is just an absolutely wonderful combination with his ray tails, snake eyes and venom pouch for a swamp raptor. When I mentioned this to a friend who started in 3rd gen the other day, this apparently makes me a minority, as everyone else finds him the most forgettable one. Great Macau is nice, he's good, he's fine. He also represents the point I was beginning to really tire of raptor fatigue, and so whilst he is probably the best fight of them all, he just sort of feels there. Which really is a shame, as objectively he's quite a good monster. I don't really like Great Azuchi though. When you learn he's based on a mischievous knife weasel yokai, then Jesus make that the starter monster. We already have Wulgs, give us a real mustelid monster. It'd be much more faithful to the initial yokai, as well as a more memorable and original starter monster instead of the 50th Dromaeosaur. As Great Azuchi is, I also feel he looks too cartoonish. After much thought, I was able to pinpoint my exact thought on this when I realised his design literally looks like a character from the Ice Age films. His face is just so overly cartoony with the snivelling rat mouth and the exaggerated eyebrows. But anyways, and as ever, thanks for watching. There were some great comments following the episode last time with a lot of good points made, Scanova the Carnotaurus suggested that baleful giganox had undergone some atavism, the process of effectively regressing to the more Kizu-like ancestor, and thus explaining the coloration and use of thunder, but likely having poorer reproductive abilities leading to its rareness. Biggest Smoke pointed out that the carcass freezing in giganox may be offspring provisioning, and I really wish I'd thought of this myself, as it would have allowed for a great comparison between Kazoo and giganox, with mass provisioning using the different strategies the various wasp species use too. Dr. Miyasaki suggested there even may be some neoteny in the two, with them regressing to a more babyish and potentially even embryonic forms. A few of you also pointed out that the taxonomy of the guild is pretty iffy, and I do agree. Right now it's the only canon we really have, but I wouldn't mind if the two were reclassified as amphibians. There are a lot of other great comments too, so I really do recommend just reading through them, and having your own discussions as well. In fact, at some point soon, maybe I should make one of those Discord thingies. We'll be continuing the theme of social dominance and its effects next time too with this teaser.